this morning and today because of Ms. Bonnery. So again, let's hear it for her and all of the other children. Having stood here nearly 20 years ago as a speaker, I know all too well both the privilege and the pressure to stand behind this desk, and that's why it makes it all the more worthwhile to hear our speakers get up here and do what they are doing. So let's hear it again for our middle schoolers and our high school. And for those of you who competed but you're not on the stage this year, I would encourage you to continue to keep pushing forward because your time may not be today, but it doesn't mean that it won't be tomorrow. So continue to do your work. One of my favorite quotations is from writer, speaker, and author Elle Kuhn, and she said, "Say what you have to say. Regret waits patiently for cowards." And I would say, not only say what you have to say, but do be and become what you have to become. Finally, we will now hear from our high school speakers. Like middle school, these students presented their speeches to a panel of judges earlier this month and earned the honor of delivering their speeches to you today to compete for the top award of speaking best before the audience. Our first high school speaker is Zion Fozo from Potomac High School. Zion has her goals in view. She would like to study at Emory University in Atlanta and major in biological sciences with the goal of becoming a doctor who will work with underfunded communities to provide health care for its mothers and infants. She says she entered this competition because she knows that the voice is the most powerful weapon one can carry, and that this competition gives her the opportunity to use her weapon in the most powerful way by bringing awareness to important issues that directly affect anyone and everyone. Please give a warm welcome to our first high school speaker, Zion Fozo.
Harriet Tubman once said, "I have freed 1,000 slaves, and I could have freed 1,000 more, if only they knew they were slaves." Slavery was not abolished, it was redesigned, scripted and edited, remarketed and rebranded, redesigned to be more profitable by flipping all the costs. We still wear the chains, except this time, the chains are in our minds and our economic energies. The chains indifferent of the color of the person wearing them. Systematic oppression. From the fields to the prison industrial complex, from slave number 234 to inmate number 234, all with one amendment. Same thing, just a change of titles. You see, you freed the slaves, yet arrest them for loitering and said, "Get back in those fields," because under the 13th Amendment, slavery is legal in the prison system. Slavery was not abolished. It was redesigned. Let freedom ring. This year marks the 155th anniversary of the 13th Amendment. Have you heard of it? Do you know its true implication? You see, maybe in a 7th grade history class, your teacher may have taught you, however, a child only educated in school is an uneducated child, George F. Education must enable one to sift and weigh evidence, to discern the true from the false, the real from the unreal, the fact from the fiction. As Dr. King once said, the function of education is to teach one to think intensively and critically. Intelligence plus character, that is the goal of true education. So, allow me to educate you. The 13th Amendment abolished slavery based on race as it had previously been. However, it now made the American government the right to make anyone of any race a legal slave. As the amendment says, neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for a crime whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction. Except as a punishment for a crime. Except as a punishment for a crime. You see, this phrase often gets ignored in America's telling of slavery and its history. The 13th Amendment did not completely abolish slavery, but rather moved it from the fields to the prison. Modern day slavery, see, this is no accident. Slavery was not abolished, it was redesigned. The New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander lays out how a system of Jim Crow replaced slavery, and later on how a system of mass incarceration rose to replace Jim Crow. During Reconstruction, Southern states quickly took advantage of the 13th Amendment's loophole by arresting people of color for minor crimes such as unemployment, loitering, gambling, and selling them to the convict lease system. See, what many don't know is the United States Congress enacted the Prison Industrial Enhancement Certification Program, which allowed for the use of prison labor. So, along with the coincidental drastic increase in the prison population during this time, profits for participating companies and revenue for the government and its private contractors soared due to the slavery and the forced labor in the prison system. Now, although the prison industrial complex was seemingly designed for the wholesale incarceration of black communities, other people of color are trapped in the same system. Latinos, African Americans, and Pacific Islanders are all incarcerated at disproportionate rates. However, we cannot achieve liberation until we address the anti-black racism and build connections between our struggles. Those of African Americans and slavery. Now, this is not to say that we have not made progress since 1865 through acts of courage and solidarity. African Americans have fought back against white supremacy and oppression for years. However, we cannot continue to remain silent for the sake of our freedom. As Dr. King once said, oppressed people cannot remain oppressed forever. The yearning for freedom will eventually manifest itself. See, slavery is more than just a removal of a prisoner's freedom. It is the denial of that prisoner's humanity. See, this exception that was carved out of the 13th Amendment allows for the continued exploitation and dehumanization of incarcerated citizens, creating a modern form of slavery, still tied closely to race, that should have been explicitly outlawed decades ago. Now, this amendment, which is still very much the law of the land today, as essential, historic, and groundbreaking as it was, has a poison pill, a trap door, an escape clause embedded in its core. This year marks the 155th anniversary of the 13th Amendment, and it is time for us to be set completely free. Let freedom reign. Henry David Thoreau once said, "The law will never make a man free. It is men who have to make the law free." You see, we have to amend this amendment, repeal this law. There have been 27 changes to the Constitution since 1789, and we can be the generation to make the 28th. Freedom must reign in the land of the people who slaved to build it. See, we have to learn that we are not born slaves, we are enslaved, but freedom is attainable. In the words of Ronald Reagan, freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. We do not pass it on to our children in the bloodstream. It must be fought for, protected, and handed to them to do the same. See, I was born into this dark skin, and in this dark skin I will die. I was persecuted for this dark skin, but with this dark skin, I will rise. And freedom will Jr. once said, we know through a painful experience that freedom is never voluntarily given by the oppressor. It must be demanded by the oppressed. The time to demand our freedom is now. Let freedom reign.
Thank you again, Zion, for that wonderful speech. Our next high school speaker is Hanaan Khabir from my alma mater, Osbourn High School. Hanaan hopes to attend George Washington University, and she too has a career goal of becoming a doctor. Hanaan has told us that she chose to participate in this year's competition because she believes this program is a perfect platform for young people to be heard and to showcase their voices. Please welcome Hanaan Khabir.
Being free or at liberty, rather than in confinement or under physical restraint. That is how this era has defined freedom. Throughout history, every era has defined freedom in their own way. Americans even preach freedom as being a core principle of our doctrine. We've had revolution after revolution and movement after movement because no one could agree as to who should be included in the definition of freedom. Whether it was white men who owned property, white men and women, or if everyone should be given the embrace of freedom. Now, in 2020, this definition has yet again been made a victim of the time. Freedom is being polarized by the same ideals that have led to countless bloody conflicts throughout history. This victimization, this polarization has already given rise to divisions. These divisions lead to the identification of differences, which leads to racism, bigotry, and involuntary segregation, which leads to social injustice. That leads to civil disobedience, which leads to persecution, which will always lead to some form of social unrest. The American definition of freedom begins with the War of Independence. 1776, the Founding Fathers gathered to sign a document that would plant the seeds of the American dream. In this document, they clearly state their definition of confinement and restraint. They write of the negation of natural rights. They write of taxation without representation. In 1782, they wrote a document defining these freedoms. In this document, which will become the foundations of the American dream, they did something that makes our dream the first of its kind. They make a living constitution, and they give it rights. They give it freedoms. Like a child, they allow it to mature and grow as our country ages. They allow loose constructions and loose interpretations of this child. They allow anyone living under the doctrines of this child the rights, the freedoms this child represents. Our Constitution is a child of America's first definition of freedom. Almost 2 centuries after the War of Independence, African Americans, despite having been considered free for so long, were only just given the seeds for their own definitions of freedom. During the Civil Rights Movement, African Americans defined confinement and restraint as a segregation and discrimination they had been oppressed by for so long. Their definition of confinement and restraint was seeing the face of Jim Crow overshadow the freedoms they should have been afforded by the American dream. Their path to freedom was protest and assembly. Their path to freedom, as unfortunate as it sounds, was being knocked down by high-pressure water hoses and chased down by police dogs. You must conceptualize. You must envision how it wasn't just adults fighting for the freedoms they had never been afforded. It was children as well. The Birmingham Children's Crusade, school-aged children, kindergarten to 6th grade, fought for their freedoms. Children, the same age as the children many of you come home to, went home to their own parents covered in bruises from the impact of the water hose and bite marks from the dogs that chased them and didn't stop, even when they were already on the ground. During this time, every African American had the same definition of what they wanted freedom from. Our ability to look around and see the faces of so many different ethnicities is what came from their definition of freedom. 30 years passed from the heart of the civil rights movement, and Americans are yet again forced to redefine what they consider to be freedom. Imagine being part of a group of young children, 14 to 16. Imagine being betrayed by the very legal system that promised the protection of your freedoms. Imagine being sentenced 6 to 14 years, your childhood gone. Imagine growing up and getting out just to see the man that once called for your death become president of the United States. That is the reality of the Central Park Five. 5 minority teenagers, unlawfully interrogated and arrested for the charge of rape and murder, sentenced 6 to 14 years for a crime they didn't commit. The worst crime these children committed was being born not white. You had men like Donald Trump who claimed to care for the minority population call for the deaths of these children, not because they committed a crime, but because the person they committed a crime against was able to bask in the glow of white privilege. The 14 and 15-year-olds were tried as children. Bacoy Weiss, 16 years old at the time, was tried as an adult and sentenced 14 years. These children defined their confinement and restraint as being forced to sacrifice their childhood because America had taken their freedoms. Why is it that when Americans defined freedom, they didn't include these children, yet they freely include men like Brock Turner? Brock Turner, freshman at Stanford University, brutally raped 3 of his classmates, one while she was unconscious. Despite all the evidence pointing towards him, Turner was given 6 months in jail, 3 years of probation. 5 minority teenagers, 14, 15, 16, were forgotten when America defined freedom, yet men like Brock Turner, white men like Brock Turner are remembered. Despite examples of those who've triumphed under the freedoms America has prided itself on, despite definitions of freedom more progressive than any other country, the case of the Central Park Five is not new. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. once said, "When we allow freedom to reign, we speed up the day that all God's children, white men and black men, Jews and Gentiles, Protestants and Catholics are able to join hands and sing in the words of the old Negro spiritual, free at last, thank God Almighty, we are free at last." This is how King defined freedom. His definition has become the foundation for core democratic principles, yet I have to tell my brothers, African American boys with the potential of becoming great men, that this country is against them. I have to tell them that because of the color of their skin, people will forget them when they define freedom. Why is that? Why is it that other parents can tell their children that the legal system may guarantee their freedoms, yet minority parents have to tell their children that the legal system may take theirs? Why is it that minority parents have to sit their kids down and tell them to be careful? Because the next cop that pulls them over may be the last. When King said, "Let freedom ring," he didn't mean just for the black man or just for the white man, just for the Jews or just for the Gentiles, just for the Protestants or just for the Catholics. King wanted freedom to ring for all of us. He wanted freedom to ring for the poor Syrian child covered in the blood of his mother, hands over his ears to block out the sounds of the bombs. For the innocent minorities spending their lives in jail cells for crimes they didn't commit. For the young woman who became a victim of man's inhibitions. For the immigrants living in what constitutes as concentration camps down at the border. He even wanted freedom to ring for that member of the KKK who isn't sure if what he's doing is right. For that neo-Nazi who had no issue with the racial slur he just uttered. The cops who saw no problem with violently beating their suspects. This is how King defined freedom. How do you define freedom? Who do you include when you define the most powerful word in any language? Freedom. Thank you.
Thank you, Hanaan, for those powerful words. The final high school speaker is a senior at Colgan High School, Jessica Gyamfi, which is crazy because I remember her being in elementary school and running around our church, and now she's graduating high school and can drive a car. It's crazy. So as a fellow Ghanaian American and multilingual student, Jessica began her public school experience in English as second language courses and lacked confidence in herself. She credits this competition, which she participated in for the first time in the 6th grade, with being pivotal in opening her voice as she's learned to speak on peace, unity, and persistence. Jessica plans to attend a 4-year university and enter a pre-med program. Please welcome another voice of freedom, Jessica Gyamfi.
Our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate, but our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. It is our light that most frightens us, not our darkness. We ask ourselves, who am I to be brilliant, gorgeous, talented, fabulous? Actually, who are you not to be? You are a child of God. Your playing small does not serve the world. There is nothing enlightening about you shrinking so that others do not feel insecure around you. After all, we are all meant to shine as children. We were born to make manifest of the glory of God that is within us. It is not just in some of us, but it is in everyone. And as we let our own light shine, we unconsciously give others the permission to do the same. as we are liberated from our own fear, our presence automatically liberates others. Those words were written by politician Mary Ann Williamson over 20 years ago. But the words are even more powerful today. I want you all to think about the question I'm about to ask. What holds you back? What is it that stops you and the people around you from letting your freedom ring? It's fear. Fear of the unknown, fear of being judged, and fear of failure. And when we let this fear take control, it leads to complacency, things not getting done, institutionalized systems continuing, creating an endless cycle of despair. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was a courageous man that had to fight against his internal fears of the unknown, judgments, and failure to make his dream a reality. That is how he allowed his freedom to reign. Therefore, we must overcome the mental enslavement of fear so that we may allow our freedom to reign. October 10th, 2014 was the day that Malala Yousafzai received the Nobel Peace Prize after fighting against the suppression of children and providing for the rights of young girls to have an education. But before that moment, she used to be a 15-year-old girl sitting in a hospital bed after being shot by a member of the Taliban. When I read her story, she made it very clear that she had an important decision to make during her recovery. Either to sit quiet or continue to fight until every girl had a school to go to. How is it that a now 22-year-old woman is still fighting to this day to make sure that every voice has a voice? Every person has the right that we have after nearly being shot dead. And many of us living in a free nation are afraid to try something again after we failed the first time. When we realize this, it's alarming. Figures such as Malala Yousafzai, Nelson Mandela, Maya Angelou, and even Dr. King himself were all faced with this question every day of their lives. What are you going to do in a world like this? These people weren't superheroes. In fact, there's not much difference between you, me, and them. We all have dreams and visions. The question is, what are you going to do to put them in action? So we must stop with the complacency. We must go out into our communities and not have the fear of facing injustice. We must go out into our schools, our workforces, and speak up against people that are being treated poorly and the insufficient practices. Because when we do this, it makes it so much easier to speak up against people that are being blatantly discriminated against and laws that are prejudiced against certain groups. If we do not speak up and take up now, the problems that we face today could be the same problems our children face every day of their lives. That's not living. That's just not being dead. So I say unto you, let freedom ring. freedom ring. Let freedom ring, so that when people come to this land, they'll be able to create a better life for themselves and for their children. Let freedom ring, so that millions of teenagers will not feel like captives in their minds, captives in their schools, and slaves to the gun violence epidemic. Let freedom ring, so that girls like myself wouldn't have to fear from when their brothers and fathers leave their houses every morning. That when they leave, girls like myself wouldn't have to fear that that day could be their father's last. Let freedom ring, until freedom cannot ring anymore. So when we leave this room and close these doors, we have a choice to make. And this isn't a choice that we make once. As long as we have breath in our very bodies, this is a choice we're going to have to make every day. The man that you see before me would not want the determination that he saw at 63 to vanish. Dr. King would not want us to become silent about the things that matter. 2020 is the year that we shall not be held back. Go out into your communities and make them better. Because your decision to look yourself in the mirror and not to be enslaved by your fear, that decision within itself can build nations. And when you make the right decision, your presence automatically liberates.